So hello everyone and welcome to Now Play This Festival and to the first event of today's program, which is dedicated to ways of relating. While a lot of classic games from Minecraft or Settlers of Catan have kind of reproduced the mechanisms of resource extraction and exploitation, today we want to focus on other ways of relating to the natural world and to each other. And while this is the last day of our festival program, it's also the start of something new, which is the beginning of our commissions program, which will extend into the year. My name is Sebastian Quack. I'm director of Now Play This Festival. And here with me to chat about their brand new collaboration is web artist and poet JR Carpenter. Hi, JR.
Hello.
Hey, and interaction designer, creative technologist Tomo Kihara. Hi, Tomo.
Hey.
We've invited JR and Tomo to collaborate for the first time for one of our Now Play This commissions. And I'm really excited to hear about what both of you are planning, what you're thinking about right now. We've pre-recorded this conversation as both JR and Tomo are on exactly opposite sides of the planet. So it was a bit difficult to find a common time to do this. But before we dive into the conversations, just a few words about the commissions program this year. So we're supporting two different projects. There's this one by JR and Tomo, and then there's a second project by design studio Free Ice Cream. We're also running a community mapping workshop right after this. And both projects will be developed over the summer and into autumn. And we're especially interested in the research and in the development process of these projects. You'll be able to follow along via our new community forum, or our email newsletter, or the usual social media channels as we go along. So let's get started. We'll talk a little bit about each of your individual practices first, and then discuss some of your current ideas and starting points of your project. So let's start with you, JR. Where are you at the moment?
I'm currently in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm the writer in residence at the University of Alberta here. And I would mention that this is on Treaty 6 territory in Western Canada.
And have you been there before?
Now, I've been at the Banff Centre many times, further southwest and in Calgary a little bit, but this was my first time arriving in this city in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah.
Can you describe a little bit the landscape that you're surrounded by?
Sure. Edmonton is in sort of central Alberta, and it feels north to me, but it's south of Glasgow. I mean, it's not that far north. And it's technically prairie, although it doesn't really seem like that here. And my impressions are, limited because I've arrived in the middle of a pandemic and I barely go into the center of the city. I don't go into shops or anything, but the most distinguishing feature of the city is that there's a river that runs through the center of the city, and there's park on either side all along. So it's, it's larger than Central Park in New York. It's a massive park in the middle of the city. And the river is called in English North Saskatchewan River, but the Cree name is Kisaskatchewan Sipi, which means swift flowing. So it's this really big, it feels like wild outdoor landscape, but right in the middle of the city. And I live right across the street from this river. So it's a very strange dichotomy between an urban center and this very wild nature.
So I know that you're interested in kind of daily routines or kind of small observations, or that's like a big part of your work. Have you been doing some of that kind of practice over there as well? Or what are some of the techniques that you like to use?
In my, in the time before, and in a lot of my recent work, I've done a lot of work with archives and, spending hours and hours in large libraries and archives, and I had all kinds of research plans for when I got here, and I just threw them right out the window because it's impossible to go into any of the collections that I wanted to work with. And I started walking in this river valley every day, and very early on decided that I was going to make a pact with another poet that we were going to go outside every day, even if it kills us. And the winter here it could kill you. It's very, very severe. So really focusing all this whole time that I've been here throughout the winter on a kind of daily walking and writing practice, trying to observe a very close quotidian kind of observation rather than, and also just like not thinking too far ahead seemed to be a good strategy.
So what kind of things do you observe?
It's a good question. It's, there's this novelty of walking in a new place, but then it could quickly wear off when you're walking in the same place day after day after day. So a lot of my work has had to do with climate and weather observation. So I'm interested in trying to observe these things that are changing every day. So maybe I'm seeing the same damn trees, but the light is different every day. The temperature is different every day. The clouds are different every day. I've become fascinated with all of the bird life here and watching them, and so looking at these small variances within something that seems like it's the same all the time, but it's not. If you start to notice variation, then it's infinitely interesting and engaging.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like you're running your own kind of data collection process there. And I know that you've worked with data and language and the kind of relationship between data and language in the past, specifically weather data, and we'll look at some of the work also later. But do you know how you got interested actually in this kind of connection between data and language, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know that I ever, I don't know. I think I've always been interested in collecting. I'm a bit of a collector. I like to find things and collect things. But I can tell you that for the past decade or more, I was living in the southwest of England. And in 2014, there were some really epic storms, just storm after storm, near the English Channel, Atlantic coast, and these huge sea storms. And I really started to think about climate change in a very local way at that point, thinking about it not as some conceptual thing, but as something that just wiped out the rail line, like that's flooding vast areas. And in the UK, the Met Office, the meteorological office, is in the southwest. It's not that far from where I live. So I started to go there and research in the library and started to really look at climate change. This funny connection between a very, very local event and just nearby this archive of all the British weather that's ever been recorded, and starting to think about data. I mean, they actually approached me because they know I do a lot of digital work, and they have this massive supercomputer full of data. And I was like, wait, you have a library? You have, and they have they have ship's logs and weather diaries that were kept at like Kew Gardens and stuff. And I started to really think about weather as a daily practice, as a daily notation practice, and something that has a lot to do with writing, actually.
Cool. Yeah, really interesting. I think we'll talk more about that later when we also look at kind of your plans or the different perspectives in the process together with Tomo. But maybe to switch, can you talk a little bit about how this move is kind of maybe changing your perspective on your work right now, or what are you doing right now, and how is it to work in Japan right now?
Yeah. So yeah, with COVID and everything, like I decided to head back to Japan, and yeah, first of all, it's really just nice to be back away from lockdown, to be with your family. So that's something that I'm really enjoying. I guess in terms of work, I find it really fascinating how different people's approach towards technology is. And I kind of realized like how I was taking it for a given, how people in Europe have this critical stance towards technology. And in Japan, like this stance of like viewing technology with a critical lens, or like trying to think about like big social problems like climate change is not something that people often do in their daily lives. So you have to really like fight to be in this critical mindset. Otherwise, it's really difficult. So that's, I think, a biggest shift in perspective, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, you work with so many different kinds of technology, right? Like, I mean, this kind of face recognition AI, or also like YouTube filter bubbles, or some of the things that you've worked with. Is there a kind of a general approach that you take to technology, or what does technology mean for you?
Yes, I always find like new technology fascinating as it can really change who we are as like an animal, I guess, because we no longer is like the same creature like pre-smartphone even, like, or like I see nobody walking without their shoes, right? Like, so we as Homo sapiens after several generations have evolved in a way that are like, you know, how do you call like the parts below your feet? There's a
in shoes, like the soles?
The soles, yes.
Yeah.
Our skins are so soft in the bottom there, so we can't really just walk barefoot now. So when you think about I see technologies as always like this new way for us to change and evolve. So that's why I guess why I really like cutting edge boundary technologies, because it has the implications to change us in like so many ways. So experimenting with that is always like, you know, trying to look at like glimpses of like how we could change. So that's, I guess, why I find it really fascinating tinkering with technology stuff.
Yeah, sounds really intimate, actually. So, I mean, I guess a lot of your work is a lot about interaction design and how people relate to each other, maybe also through technology. Is there like a specific type maybe of interaction that you're interested in, or a specific type of relationship maybe that you want to create with your work?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's really important to focus on the playful aspects of these interactions. Because I think there's something very human about trying to be playful with whatever you have. And yeah, trying to approach technology from that lens of how you can play with it is really something that's central to my work. So I always try to look for the playful qualities within any kind of like medium that I'm trying to operate in.
And are you mostly interested in the kind of human to human play, or also in the human to nature play, or how do these two kind of directions work together for you?
For me, I guess I'm interested in this human to computer, human to technology / kind of play. Yeah.
Cool. So maybe we can have a look at some of the materials that you're currently discussing, that you're looking at together, and go a little bit deeper into some of the ideas that you're discussing right now.
Sure. Yeah, I will share my screen. Wait. I hope. Yeah, so I hope you're seeing the screen now.
Ah, cool. Okay. This is one of your projects, right? Should we jump right in there maybe? Like what are we looking at, Tomo?
Yeah, so maybe to explain like from where we started, like we started each other with showing like the projects we did in the past and where we are currently interested in. And this was one of my recent projects called World Collider, which was a project attempting to collide the East and the West through this medium of augmented reality. And what you're seeing now, maybe it's better if I play this video, was this attempt to like oh, to combine like extracted 3D models of Tokyo into Amsterdam to see how like it can change in terms of like how it looks. And it was really an interesting experiment and insight for me, as it shifts the perspective a lot and kind of like allows you to offer like a new lens to look at these cities. For instance, like I realized these signs, I started off with like experimenting with American like signs, for instance, McDonald's and Starbucks, and kind of realizing that like there's nothing new about it, which also tells that like our everywhere around the world, like the American like capitalism kind of nature has invaded. So it was really interesting way for me to really think about these things. And I wanted to do something along using this augmented reality to like allow perspective shifting. And that's, I guess, where we started this whole like conversation.
Yeah, and so where we started was Tomo showing that and me showing this very lo-fi kind of piece. This was a recent web-based work that was also designed for phones, actually, but it also works on computer. It's not a standalone app, it's a web app. And I was trying to, this came out of those storms that I was just mentioning. And there's a kind of authored text, which is more my comfort zone. You know, I published books, but I had this live wind data calling a weather API into the piece, and that the wind data was driving part of the poem. So the blue text is dependent on what month it is, and the text just below, so like flags extended or wind direction shown by smoke drift is determined by the wind. So it was an attempt for me to relinquish some control over the piece and let the wind, you know, let the environment actually be an active participant, not exactly an author in this case, but it was a first step for me. And I had a bit of budget to work with a developer, my friend Kate Lovelace, so lovely. So we, you know, it was where I came to this thinking from.
This was from one specific location, right? The wind.
Yeah, and you know, again, sort of due to the smallness of the budget, I think we could only really deal with one location. And because the text was very specifically, this was thinking that came out of those storms. So it, you know, it was the way that the weather was affecting one region, but expanding outward from there. So there's a calendar kind of form with the a horizontal scrolling through the months of the year. But the web piece, the web app has 3 different years. So it's expansible, but within the limits of this project and the you know, the limits of this budget, we sort of, that's as far as we were able to get. Then, you know, and then developed it into a book form and developed it into these, you know, how can we push this material as far as we can go?
Is this kind of relationship as with the natural world as co-author, maybe? Is that something that you're interested in general also, or that you think about?
Yeah, and increasingly, and trying to think beyond the human scale. So it's a lot of what Tomo and I've been talking about is, you know, how to get people to pay attention to very small things. So so this is quite authored text, the sort of paragraph text, but it's actually data that I had been just writing small observations into a Twitter account for 7 years, the 7 years that I lived in this location. So it is raw data in a certain way. And then when I went to make the piece, I was like mining my own archive of data. And I'm trying to get this relationship going. Like for me, the play aspect is trying to engage people in the idea that kind of seemingly boring day-to-day notation of data is actually a participation in this much bigger project, right? So like it seems to me to be a big part of the challenge of how do we think about climate change, because we're just so small. We have these small bodies and these small temporal frames, these small lifespans, and these weather patterns, this climate change is happening on this really massive scale. So how do you kind of, I'm always finding for ways to link these things, but looking for the small moment as the link between these two systems.
Yeah, and kind of the body being there, actually making the observation, that's maybe also something that connects both of your work, right? With this kind of importance of the body being there, using the AR technology, like actually physically being there, like imagining that you see the sign and imagining that you make an observation.
And this was also a common thread between our work with the phone, that I wanted to make this piece. I usually make work for the web because I've been making work for the web since 1995. So I think on a horizontal laptop kind of scale. And for this piece, I really wanted to make it optimized for the phone, because I was thinking about how we check the weather app on the phone, and how, that it's become so, we've become acclimatized, we might say, to that kind of interface with the outside world. Like we don't go outside without checking the weather first, and well, not in this climate anyway. So yeah, that kind of thinking about that, how we're reading, like even the scale of how we're reading. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe let's look at some of the other materials that you discussed. Yeah, what's this?
So as we were talking about these things that were interesting to us, I really liked Tomo's sign piece, and I started to think about, instead of the found signs, thinking about these signs as just spaces to write into. Right, I'm a writer. I'm like, ooh, I could write in that space, and how that might, create a possibility, create an opening for play. And also, what if there's a kind of expectation of what we use signs for, like signs point to, signs are supposed to be true and factual and stuff. And so I'm always interested in using things for things they're not supposed to be used for. I'm like trying to make art on the web. And so we had lots of other examples, but we were thinking about the piece with the billboard that's full of text is Robert Montgomery, and we looked at Tim Echel's and some other artists that use text on a kind of big scale and use things like the billboard, but for art. And think that was starting our thinking about how we might manipulate the signs, using signs for things they're not supposed to be used for. But also the text on the other side of the screen, Painting for the Wind, I'm really inspired by Yoko Ono's instruction poems. From the Grapefruit book. And all that sort of era of like Fluxus, performance scripts, and thinking, as a writer, what my relationship to games is, and thinking about these, games have instructions, and this idea of a prompt. I'm also a teacher, and I give creative writing prompts all the time. So this was a sort of moment of combining, a sign as a space we could write into, and using that space to write a prompt of some kind that prompts people to notice something that they might not have noticed before, but also to elicit some kind of response, a prompt that's also a question that then might invite an answer.
Yeah, and I guess for me, like I also really like signs. We also have this like when we're like having and collecting these sources of inspiration. Um, one thing that like stood out to me is the fact that like signs were something that existed for like a long time, and it always reflects like the people's desires and also like the people's characteristics as well. So on the left, like you have pictures um of people like in, I think this should be a picture of like London back in the days, and it kind of shows what people are interested in. Like it's always about like drinks and having a drink, getting laid, and it's really interesting how it affects even those even when, and it also was interesting when you look at this as there's no like texts, it's really visual, and it's also reflecting the fact that most people couldn't lead back then. And on the like I shared this like interesting sign which is quite famous in Japan, which is like a warning sign that warns people that tsunami actually comes up this point after an earthquake. So if there is an earthquake, you need to go above this sign. And there was this really incident back in the Tohoku earthquake incident in 2011, where like people were saved because they knew what this sign meant. And I
And
see
when is this from? Like this sign?
the sign it dates quite back. There's like I think more than like 500 years ago. I think it's not.
It's not like
yeah,
it's not like a current day sign. It's actually
not current state. It's
yeah.
from it's from like the super past. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's really interesting how these signs are used to communicate. Yeah, like these informations.
Yeah, and so I love that sign. And one of my fascinations is with old weather. Like, you know, when we're thinking about climate change, we often think about the future, right? And we're trying to predict these future models, but the only way that we can do that is with old data. If we didn't have the old data, we wouldn't be able to compile the predictions. And so this is just as an example, but it's a little piece that I made for a journal called Taper, that all the work in the journal is 2 kilobytes. And it's a generative text. Tomo and I are both quite interested in generative text, variable text, and miniature ones. So we spent a whole afternoon looking at miniature text generators. And this one is made from some old weather data that I found in the National Meteorological Library and Archive at the Met Office. And so there was a big storm in the North Atlantic on the 6th of February, 1870, and all the different ships in the North Atlantic, because ships are required to keep a ship's log. So there was weather data from all of those ships from that night. So this text just generates these little couplets, not scientifically accurate, not going to change the world, not, you know, but it's calling attention to that. We only know about climate change because somebody has been noting this weather over and over and over and over and over and over again. But then also thinking about how we might use generative or variable text in the sign contexts. So making small signs that are, you know, pointing to something different than signs usually do. I mean, and that text is generative. But we've also been looking at ways to, you know, the user or the player or the reader or whoever they are, they're in a present tense and they're looking at a present through their phone, and they're in a present climate. But how can we call attention to a recent past climate? So we don't know yet about if what old weather data we might or might not be able to access, but we've been talking around that idea of how do we call attention to that climate might be changing now by way of evoking the past. So has it always been this cold, or something like that?
Yeah, and also like when I was researching like artists who work in this space, like using signs, I came across this work by Miguel Marquez, and he has this really fascinating approach about using signs and actually intervening into spaces to create interesting and playful contexts. So on the light, you see a bunch of pigeons, but also like a sign kind of saying something that's kind of like implicating that like there's actually like a pigeon airport, which really expands your imagination. And on the left, like you have this playful, like endless waiting area on top on like this bench. And I just really love the way how just a simple intervention in the form of a sign can really like add so many interesting contexts to that place. So yeah, this was like our one source of inspiration.
And these, so then we started collecting signs like mad and sending each other Instagram messages of signs. And so the sign with the cat is something I just found on the internet. But I love how signs that are supposed to mean one thing can then mean another thing. So you try telling this cat not to sit on this sign. You know, the sign is for the human, but it's the cat sits on it. So I'm interested in how, this human, non-human. But also a sort of funny thing about our collaboration is that, you know, Tomo's in Tokyo and I'm in this wild nature park every day. And so trying, I had a whole session of sending Tomo signs in nature. And there's a lot of warning signs in nature. And they're often very ambiguous. Like horses may be on trail. It's like, but there are no horses, but there might be. But I don't know. There's a lot of warning signs in nature that are warning humans about nature and, you know, stuff like that. So this is me trying to explain nature to Tomo. And a lot of the thing that we've been thinking about is how to make something work. You know, if you're walking down the streets of Tokyo, or if you're walking in the Yorkshire Dales, which is where I normally live in England, you know, so how that works and how it messes with our relationship, you know, what our ideas are about nature and what we're paying attention to depends a lot on where we are.
And I mean, also as game or interaction designers, I kind of know that every sign is always misunderstood. Like every misunderstanding that you can imagine will happen for sure.
Yeah.
But I think we're really playing on that. And there's something about the way that I've been working as a writer that plays on that. And so you know, in the kind of writing that I'm doing as I'm walking in the river valley here, actually, I'm mostly writing it as Instagram captions right now, and then I copy it into a document and I save it, and I'm just not looking at it. I just keep going. But it is these very small phrases, and I'm interested in how, you know, one phrase then affects the next phrase and back and forth. And that often happens with signs. So caution. Horses may be on trail, like their signs often have these two parts. And so I'm thinking a lot about these very, very, very small units of writing and how to almost channel that misunderstanding, you know, like how to make a question that actually stops people and makes them think, because you know, it doesn't quite make sense, but that's the point, that's the hook. Which is how we've come to our very tentative working title. You know, another thing is that you know, we have these different language associations with things. Even me, I've been in England for 12 years, so I'm in Canada and people are using different words for things, and I'm like, you know, I'm confused. And then Tomo has very different references for certain words, so we're still thinking this one through. But in English anyway, a weather warning, you know, like storm warning in effect, is a very common phrase. But there's also that warning sign, like we just saw in the previous slide, caution, you know, attention, warning, you know. So we're exploring that right now.
So what are some of the oh, cool, these are also nice.
These are Tomo's very new sort of sketches based on all of these ideas that we've just been talking about. And this thing on the this sky blue enough is the kind of question that I've been thinking about and imagining this as a generative, a version of this as a generative text, like, you know, is it blue enough? Is this sky always blue? Is the sky, you know, like trying to think about these small questions that can make people think about the past. Like, has it always been this cold? You know, has it ever been this cold? Will it always be this cold? Like these kind of small variances.
So what are some of the techniques or kind of activities that you would use, Tomo? Like, are you also starting to prototype stuff or like make sketches or like?
Yeah, I've started like prototyping a lot with web augmented reality, mainly in AR.js. And I kind of want this not to be an app, but also to be something like a web page where anybody can access and start playing with it. And depending on where they access it, like maybe how you interface it changes. And I think that's something quite interesting. On the other part I found really fascinating about this augmented reality stuff is that it's generative in a sense that, like, depending on what kind of context you put these signs in, it really changes the whole meaning of what the picture is. So for instance, on the left, this is not a good sign. It has a bit of this double meaning that, yeah, it's not really a good sign, but good sign as in like whatever is like in the background is not like not like a good indication of like the what's to come. So if you put this like near a traffic jam happening in Japan, that also means something. If you put this in front of like I don't know, like the headquarters of Shell, for instance, in the Amsterdam, it would mean like entire different thing. Like this is not a good sign. Or you can actually place it literally on near like a bad sign, and that's also would mean something. That would also mean, yeah, that's not a good sign. So
and it's interesting how it's kind of the reversal of the like classic use of augmented reality, like in Pokemon Go, right, where you kind of you find the stuff that the systems engineers and the game designers put there for you to collect. And this is more like you know, being asked to place something or to comment or to find like the right location, or to comment on something real. I think that's really interesting, like kind of inverted use of AR maybe.
That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. But yeah, one thing I found through playing a lot with this word collider is that like you just start trying to find interesting places to mess up with. And I want this to have that playful nature for people to be walking about and like thinking, like this place might be interesting place this sign to add like additional context and like make pictures out of. So it's almost maybe in a sense like a meme generating aspect to it, which might be interesting.
We keep talking about this word. I keep using this word juxtaposition that doesn't really sit well with Tomo because it sort of means something else in Japan. But
Yeah.
But it's this contrast, you know, and is really interesting. Like here also, you know, this, you know, there's a long history of signs. So in weather, so here, because of the altitude and various things, there's often we can see a halo around the sun, or sundogs on the side of the sun, and it's not a good sign because it means that some really, really cold weather is coming and stuff like that. So it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition of this very like urban looking signage in, you know, that could pertain to sort of a weather folklore situation.
Yeah, really cool. So yeah, this will be super exciting to follow as you both develop it further. I think, as I said at the beginning, like from now to this side, we're really into the research and development phase. So we'll come up with ways to present different stages inside this. One thing I can already say is that we have a thread on the community forum where you can post your own signs that you found in the landscape. So this would be a nice kind of research help, I guess, to just go out there, find interesting looking signs, post them, discuss them. That's kind of a thing we'll start off with. And then we'll update via the forum, via the newsletter, via social media when there's new formats, maybe something like playtests, or we just do kind of another conversation round when there's more to discuss moving forward. Yeah, so I want to thank both of you for joining me in this discussion. It was really interesting. I'm really curious to see what comes out of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. And then just a little bit of sign posting for the festival audience. If you stick in the stream, just in a little bit, there's also the workshop by Free Ice Cream, which will be about kind of mapping the relationships in the games and experimental game design and play for art community. So the things that you're interested in, hopefully, and how kind of the connections between all of us can maybe be transformed either into a playful piece, but also with this question of can that somehow help us address the climate crisis, or how can we kind of make best use of the relationships that we have in developing kind of responses that fit to our existing networks around us, basically. So that's what the workshop is going to be about. It will be live, so see you there. And bye to both of you. See you soon.